We are now. There it is. So for the first question that came in, yes, we are recording the video and we're sharing it. So hello, beautiful people and any animals or kids that are with you. Hopefully this will be entertaining for all. We are so excited to be here today. There has been so much chatter about what's happening in just a few days, if you want to actually put a start timer on it. And so we really want to go through all those details with you. We may not cover every single detail or every single scenario, but we're going to try our best to do what we can. Please put in your questions along the way, and then we'll try to answer them as we're going through. And if we can't, we'll save them for the end. And then we're going to have an email afterwards to send you the link to the recording and also a ton of links posted from us, posted from many different sources, including from Yahoo and Google. So you can go straight to them as well. And then a lot of other fantastic resources for those who really want to propose, not propose, but explain the changes in maybe different ways. So sometimes when you hear it explained one way, it makes more sense than another. So we have a ton of resources for you, a ton of guides and all that good stuff. So let's get started. Who are we? My name is Jennifer Lance. I run the consulting team here at Kickbox for Deliverability. I deal with all the industry relations stuff as well. And I'm super excited to be here today. And Pilar, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi there, I'm Pilar Bauer. I work for Inbox Monster as a senior deliverability consultant. So definitely keeping tabs on all these changes in the email world. So happy to share that with everybody today.
Excellent. And so just to let you guys know who our companies are in case you've never heard of us before, I work for Kickbox. Primarily, we're email verification company dealing with helping senders or anyone who's collecting email addresses through form capture, for example, to help just verify that the emails are alive. And I work on the deliverability side as well with consulting to help with anything from issues inboxing to authentication and the whole gamut. Pilar, can you tell us a little bit about Inbox Monster?
Definitely. Inbox Monster is a deliverability monitoring platform. So we have many different data points, including seedless, integrations with Google Postmaster tools and SNDS, which is becoming way more important as well. DeMark reporting and spam trap network. So I help our customers read the data and provide insights and keep up with industry trends such as this one. So if you're already monitoring deliverability and keeping up with best practices, you may not have much to worry about or take action, but definitely as they're becoming requirements, it is important to pay attention. So we're here to share all that knowledge with you today.
Exactly. And here's a quick rundown of what we're going to be talking about. We'll dive in a little bit on some of the technical pieces, but we're going to try not to get into too much of the nitty gritty. And one of the biggest things I think that's going to be helpful, at least with this webinar, I don't know if all the other ones are, one takeaway is that it's really important to work with your provider on a lot of these steps. And we're going to have a list of questions that you can ask them, or just stuff to start getting you thinking about what do I need to ask them or how should I work with them. And I think it's going to be a huge part for a lot of senders. Some senders will manage their own infrastructure, and that's a different set of questions. But the ones that we have today are mainly for what you can do for your provider, what you need to ask them, because they're also involved in this and they're going to have a big weight to lift if they haven't already. And I know from those that we've spoken to, a lot of them have been working on this as soon as this information came out, and getting all of their clients into compliance or getting them ready so that we can easily shift over. So what's happening? Let's jump right in. So basically, best practices are being solidified as requirements. Are these best practices and these requirements new? No. These have been around even from the start of when I started. There's a few new ones that kind of developed as RFCs it really started to roll out more and stuff gets adopted. But essentially, the best practices that they're really trying to nail down have been around all along. They maybe have been mentioned on web pages, and so the hope is that people follow them. But there's also the reality that not everybody knows about web postmaster pages, or they may not be aware of all the granular pieces, because I think a lot of senders actually have a lot more on their plate than just email. And so by making this a requirement, and if you think about how they did it with PR, it's like new requirements. These aren't really new, but if you state it that way, it gets a lot of buzz, gets a lot of people talking. And when you make it a requirement, it doesn't create different actions versus this is a best practice. So I think of it as if you tell someone, as we move into like the other benefit of it, is that these documented requirements are now creating thresholds and ranges and specific points to kind of look towards. It makes me think of, if you tell someone don't speed, okay, but if you don't know what that speed limit is, some people might realize I'm definitely speeding, and especially with the type of road I'm on. But others might not know, like, oh, is this too fast or slow? So these requirements, these documented requirements, I don't know why I'm air quoting, forgive me. They really help understand, what does it mean to speed? What does it mean to be authenticated in the receiver's eyes? So this is all a lot, I think, clarifying too what is expected of a sender. And another question that might come up is this only Yahoo and Google doing this? To me, the answer is yes and no. Yes, in the sense of they're the ones that have been discussing it, publishing it, specifically for these guidelines that we're going to talk about, that are really like these core features that you have to get started with now. But it's not the end. A lot of other mailbox providers actually look at all of these same data points, and they also have the same requirements, but they might not have them published. And if they don't, there's a lot that are also kind of working their way, or at least saying, hey, if you're going to do this for Yahoo and Google, I want that too. So again, if you're looking at, well, how do I make sure I'm just compliant with Yahoo and Google? You really want to be compliant across the board, because this is important for everyone in the whole ecosystem, the email ecosystem. So Pilar, can you get into a little bit about why this is all happening?
Yes, I would say the very simple answer is Gmail and Yahoo are taking action to protect their users even more. Email is a channel that none of us are ever saying email is dead anymore, but it's very alive and thriving, and there are a lot of bad senders out there. And so email is just a channel that should be protected and private for users, and Gmail and Yahoo are well aware of all the spammers and scammers out there that can use email maliciously. So they really want their recipients to feel safe using their inbox, as we all do. And senders should be happy about this, because if people are over their inbox or like over trying to be scammed, they're not going to be using their email as much. So senders should really be happy about this change and evolution in this email ecosystem, as Jen said.
Yeah, I love that. And in Gmail's announcement, they said that every day they block 15 billion emails. I believe I have that data point right. So that's what they block. Imagine all the other mail that they're getting and they have to process and go through. It is a lot. So this is, this is part of their attempt of saying, how else can we improve, better detect and get more signals. So Pilar, who's impacted? Who are we talking about today that needs to actually look at these guidelines and start implementing changes?
I would say everybody. I think if you're on this call, you're probably considered a bulk sender. We've heard the 5,000 number thrown out, which I wish they hadn't even had said, since I think people are going to unnecessarily get stuck on that. So even if you're not sending 5,000 a day, but you are an email marketer or sending in bulk, or maybe you send a newsletter a couple times a month to 1 million people and less than 5,000 other days, like definitely don't want to get stuck on this number. But if you are a bulk sender, all these definitely apply to you. And I think the really positive thing too is that Gmail historically has not been very open about much. So we're getting a lot more transparency, and they have also been clear that they're listening to feedback from senders, from deliverability people, from ESPs. So they've been rolling with that and updating their FAQs and really being clear about things. So, and I think it's important too that if you're not following these requirements, I mean, they're going to be rolling this out, not just like one day and here it is, but they are going to be transparent too. If you're not compliant, how can you help? You know, to really good senders, they are going to be sharing what we're not being compliant about, or if you might have missed something. So, you know, and if you're not going to start making these changes, it will limit the ability to remediate. So of course, every once in a while you could get stuck, and there's postmaster tickets and things you can do to help fix the issues. But if you are just ignoring these new requirements, you probably have been having deliverability issues already, because everybody's been saying, these are not new. But you will be limited in how you can, you know, help fix these issues as well. So that being said, I know everybody that is on this call knows that they're impacted, or they wouldn't be signing up for it. So I think just all senders are impacted by this and just should be paying attention.
Yeah, and I saw something in the chat, really good clarification. So thank you for pointing out. When we see Yahoo, so in Google's requirements, they say, at least for right now, and think of this as not just their rollout of this iteration, this will continually evolve. The idea is that we're trying to make the email ecosystem as safe as possible, to create more and more signals to help really identify those who are creating harm in some way, or even abuse with their list, even if it's mundane content. If you're creating a negative experience, we want to be able to filter that out. So Gmail specifically said, for right now, these requirements are for mail being sent to any like gmail.com addresses or googlemail.com. Not yet workspace, but I doubt that that's going to be far away. There's other aspects to that, in terms of like, you've got admin control and how they want to manage that. But I do think that that will come into the fold at some point. For Yahoo, and this is what the chat brought up that I thought is really good to point out as well, if you're not following, Yahoo's not just yahoo.com. Yahoo manages thousands of domains. So they see a lot coming into their systems as well. So it's something to keep in mind that, again, I wouldn't look at your list and say, oh, I just need it to apply to this and this. Make these changes holistically so it applies to everything. So, you know, Pilar had mentioned, I loved how she was like, I wish they didn't put a number on the bulk sender, but there's a reason for it, because they don't want people thinking they're one-to-one mail. If it's just like a personal use rolls into this. But so again, it's about, I need to give you some guidelines. So this is really just a range to say, you know, if you don't hit that 5,000, it doesn't mean that they're not classifying you as a bulk sender, especially with some type of subscription mail. So it's just a guide that as you start to near these larger number volumes, you're getting seen as someone who's mailing larger volumes consistently. And even if it's not consistently enough that they can identify you more than once. So you're going to be considered a large sender, and they really want you following these guidelines, these requirements, because again, they're trying to keep everything safe, and they want to prevent people from saying, oh, well, I'm actually sending a little bit less, so maybe I'll send a little less over here and I'll get away with it because I'm under 5,000. They see senders, because you might say how, and to the 5,000, the question 5,000 what your daily volume, or volume in a day. And so it's one thing they've said before is, if once you're considered a bulk sender, you're always a bulk sender. And how they find out how that volume is calculated is many different ways. It's unique to the providers and how they want to view a sender. But the idea is that if they know that you're sending off of multiple platforms, they're going to see you as a bulk sender. Even if your volume per platform is lower than 5,000, the idea is that this is still coming from one entity. They're a bulk sender, so they need to follow all of our guidelines. So Pilar, can you take us through quickly what the requirements are?
Yes, and this slide's just high level. We're going to go into each of these individually as well, but the top three are authentication. They need to know that the mail is actually coming from who it is intended to come from, which is cutting down on spammers. Spam rates should be less than 0.1%. They have done the 0.3% as kind of a ceiling, but that is not something you want to aim for. And then list unsubscribe post, which is not just your normal unsubscribe link in the body of your email, which is definitely still required for marketing mail. But yes, we will get into each of these in a little more detail.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with DeMark. I'm going to get a little technical, but I'm going to try not to. So there might be some tweaks, and I'm trying to make it high level, so it's not 100% maybe the way I'm going to describe it, so it's easier to understand, but might not be exactly perfect with the RFC. But DeMark's under the RFC 7489, and what it means is, and what Pilar just said, is authentication, and we're is about being able to identify who's authenticating the message at the time of send. And this is all based on the DNS. So it's all based on domains, which is something that you can look up. It's public information. Anyone can look it up and say, okay, for DKIM, I see that there's this cryptographic signature in the message. If I can look it up and I can match my keys to that, and I'll just make it simple that my keys match. I know that that domain is truly signing this message because it's a private key and it's matching to a public key, and they're matching up together. So that's one thing to, and that's what it means by signature passing. Basically, you're able to unlock it and say, "Ooh, okay, this domain, the key that's posted here was able to truly unlock this signature." And then the idea with DeMark is that whoever's hosting those keys, that it also matches who's sending the message. So as a recipient, if you look at your inbox, you'll see, oh, this message is from Kickbox. The address is at kickbox.com. But if I'm signing the message with example.com, there's some discrepancy there. It doesn't mean that it's not a true, legitimate message, but by being able to align them or make the DKIM domain match the from domain, and that's that first one, it creates a little bit more, like when you go to a bar and you say, hey, my name's Jen, and then, you give a different one, and your license is Sarah. It's able to like rectify that and say, okay, the domain that's authenticating is also the domain that we're sharing with the customer to help prevent some type of spoofing that can go on there. And on top of the DeMark, part of that is not just I want domains to match, because you can do that without DeMark. DeMark also allows you to provide a policy that says if the authentication domain does not match what I'm presenting in the email or what the email is presenting, then I want you to do this. It's either none, which is don't do whatever you normally would, quarantine, which means I'd like you to put it in a spam folder or, out of the inbox in some way, shape, or form, or reject, which means I want you to refuse the message or bounce it. So the DeMark compliant, the first option is I'm going to have a DKIM signature in there and the domain's going to match my from, or SPF. And most senders automatically have SPF in there. And SPF, what that does is if I send from IP 1234, I want the receiver to be able to look up my domain and say, do they really want 1234 mailing their mail? And that's what the SPF record does. It lists all the IPs that you say, yes, they can mail on behalf of me. So DeMark also says, well, you can either send with DKIM and match those domains up, or you can send with SPF and match those domains up, or you can do some combination. Maybe you send with both and both of them match the from, or you send with both and only one of them matches. So DeMark allows some of this flexibility where you can have one or the other. The reason why, and then just to give you a visual, if you still have no idea about DeMark and what I was talking about, because that was without visuals, sometimes it's hard to understand, but the point here is that the domains match. So I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but at the very bottom, authentication results, we'll just focus on that versus the top part. But basically you're saying there's the domain kickbox.com for DKIM, and SPF is Amazon SES. And so basically what DeMark's doing is, one, do these authentication methods pass? And they do. And do they match what I'm sending as, which is the one up here on the from? And if it does, then DeMark passes, and then you can see what your policy is if something were not to either pass or not align. And so that's the technical view of it in your headers if you want to take a peek and see what you have enabled. But in this case, this message does pass DeMark. It's DeMark compliant. So because the DeMark RFC allows you to say, oh, what if I only put DKIM? Or what if I only put SPF? What Google and Yahoo are doing is they're saying you have to have both authentication protocols. You have to have SPF and you have to have DKIM. But because of the way the DeMark spec works, at least only one of them has to align. So you have to have both of them. These are for the bulk senders. You have to have SPF and DKIM, but one of them has to align. There is a slight difference with those who are under 5,000 or aren't considered bulk, and that's just that they don't specify that you need a DeMark record, and that it does say in the requirements for Gmail at least that they want you to have SPF or DKIM, and it says for your domain. So ideally it'd be nice if they still used your domain as well, but you don't necessarily need both SPF and DKIM, for example. The other aspect is that you need the DeMark record, and the minimum is this one here, V equals DeMark 1 and P equals none. There is another attribute in there, which is RUA, which is a reporting address. If you can, I would work on adding that today. And, you know, there's definitely services out there that are very affordable. Some are free that allow you to send your DeMark reports, because that's the one really awesome benefit about DeMark is that you can report. The mailbox, the receivers that get the mail, if they see that DeMark is passing or not, they can send aggregated reports to whomever you want them to. And then you can look at them and say, oh, wow, I actually have a lot of legitimate streams going out that aren't properly authenticated. I got to go fix them. And then it also allows you to say, once everything looks good, if somebody's trying to spoof my domain, I want you to do either quarantine, reject, or I'll let you decide. So this DeMark record to start, because it is a heavy lift to get a reporting agency involved if you're not going to do it internally, to analyze all of your streams and to get them into compliance to be DeMark, to pass DeMark and be aligned everywhere. It can take a lot of work, and it's a lot for people who haven't ever dealt with DeMark before. So for now, they want people at least have a P of equals none because it's a step forward, so that down the line, they can then maybe say, well, now I require a RUA address. And it kind of helps to force the step forward of I need you to start looking at your reports. And then they might move into a quarantine policy or something like that. So things aren't done after this rolls out. They're going to continue to evolve and add more requirements as we go. So that is all very technical. And forgive me if it was a little hard to understand. But, you know, there's lots of consultants out there. There's the Email Geeks channel. You can reach out to us here, Inbox Monster as well. If you have questions, you're like, can you explain it a little bit more? Because this is very technical and it does require work for senders, especially with your DNS teams, to say, I need you to put in these records, and then making sure you're doing it the right way, that you're not putting in too many records. So there's a lot of little Q&A steps that also need to happen, which is why working with your partner, your vendor, your ESP, a consultant or whatever will be really helpful here if you don't have DeMark in place yet. Okay, I'm going to hand this over to Pilar because I'm sure you're tired of hearing me talk about spam rates.
No worries. And I just want to reiterate on the DeMark is that the none policy should not be your end goal. So if you're just now setting up DeMark, I'm sure you don't want to be overwhelmed by next steps, but those are always in the cards. And with the reporting aspect, Marcel from Yahoo on another webinar was like, the R in DeMark literally stands for reporting. So it will be weird if you don't have reporting happening. So just, you know, while this is the minimum requirements for, you know, the February rollout, definitely start looking ahead to increasing that policy. And as far as authentication goes, I think that this requirement is also a step towards BIMI, which Gmail and Yahoo also very much encourage. So BIMI can be a whole other webinar, but I think that's also their end goal with the authentication requirements as well. So moving on to the spam rates. So 0.3, as we've said, just is not your goal either. Your goal is to stay below 0.1. And as we've talked about too, this is not just Yahoo and Gmail, and this is not new. I know for a fact Microsoft and Comcast put in extra filtering if your complaint rates are 0.2 and above. So definitely want to keep in the 0.1 range and monitor it. Google Postmaster Tools has user reported spam data, so that is something to really keep an eye on. Microsoft SNDS, which, you know, again, Microsoft is not communicating these requirements, but you can keep track of your complaint rates there. And Yahoo will be launching similar information in their new sender hub, which is, I think, still being worked on, but definitely they're giving us the data. Just pay attention to it. And I mean, regardless of the numbers, you don't want to be sending mail to your subscribers that they don't want. So as far as even just being a positive sender, definitely don't want these spam complaint rates up. So that is that for spam.
Excellent. And so one thing you can do as well is Yahoo has a feedback loop, so you can have a feel for what your complaint rates are. Do you get all the complaints? Perhaps not, but it's important to have a good feel, because if the complaints you are getting exceed these numbers, you know you're well over. Google Postmasters, it's free. If you go to postmaster.google.com, you can sign up and register your domains. The process for that would take me longer than what we have on the call right now. It's pretty quick, but there's a lot of questions that can often come out of that. But get yourself set up on Google Postmaster, and they will share what their complaint rate is. And something to keep in mind really quick when we talk about the 0.1 and the 0.3. Google has stated that their complaint rate is complaints for mail that has landed in the inbox for an active user. So the days of calculating complaint over delivered, that doesn't apply at Gmail. So if you sent 1,000 emails and you're like, whoa, how did my complaint rate get to 5%? You could say, well, not 1,000 not 100% of those 1,000 emails made it to the inbox, and not all of them are active users. So what they do is that denominator changes to really focus on active and in the inbox. And that's why sometimes your spam complaint rate might look much higher. And it's still bad though, because those who are active and are getting it in their inbox are not happy with it. So Google Postmasters, where you want to see Google's truth of your complaint rate and what you want to make sure that you're staying well below the 0.3 and hopefully below 0.1.
And
So,
one more,
yeah, go
a
ahead.
little bit more on spam complaint rates, because this is the biggest question that I've seen on other webinars and likely in our Q&A chat is, what's the time frame on this? Are we going to be blocked if we go 0.4 on a single day in a month? They haven't been like completely specific on time range. I think a lot of people are maybe like assuming over the past 30 days. But you're also not going to be penalized if, say, you send out a few emails and your complaint rate spikes because maybe the day before you had a large send. So they are still going to be looking at, they're not going to penalize you for one day at 0.4, but definitely as a trend and just as an overall, sending habit, just in general, stay in the 0.1 range.
Yeah, and Al Iverson on Spam Resource has a really great interview with Neil from Google. And he had mentioned that the way they calculate spam rate is daily. And so they attribute the complaint to the day of send. So that's something that's also really important, that if you are seeing these higher complaint rates that might look odd, again, it goes back to perhaps not all of the mail I thought went to the inbox, or maybe they're not as active, these users, than I thought. So we're not going to get the exact science behind what they're doing, but the goal is to point out that there may have been a problem. And like Pilar just said, it's all like, look at your trending, look at what you're seeing everywhere else, every other data point that you're seeing, look, you're targeting, and does it make sense in terms of, well, yeah, I probably would have had a higher spam rate there. So all this stuff does really get people to kind of turn and look at your programs again, which I think is also really good. But let's move on to unsubscribes. You might hear this a lot. They want the one click. And Pilar mentioned this earlier. You have to still have your unsubscribe in the body. But when they mention one click unsubscribe in these requirements, they're specifically asking about the RFC 8058, which goes in the header. And this is what your provider should be putting in for you. List unsubscribe started with 2359, which allowed a mail to, and you could point to a web page that someone could go to. And it, list unsubscribe in general helps to reduce false positives, because if you give a customer an easy way to unsubscribe and it's clear it's an unsubscribe, it helps remove anybody who's using spam as a quick way to just delete the message or to be removed permanently. And ultimately that helps improve your reputation. So list unsubscribe is for the end user, but it's also really good for the senders, because if you're looking at just how many people complained without putting into perspective, you might be getting a bad reputation. But if you understand, like, oh my goodness, a lot of people just decided to do a quick clean of their inbox, hitting the spam button when they should have used the trash button, you don't want those false positives weighing on your reputation. So that's, list unsubscribe helps with that. But the newer piece that they're requiring is the list and subscribe post. And this offers a one-click way to unsubscribe, but it's not within your email. Don't put one-click unsubscribe in the body of your email, because bots will just unsubscribe people. This allows the UIs for the receivers like Gmail and Yahoo to provide a button that now when you click on it, it sends an automatic post to the endpoint and says, remove them. And it's faster. It also allows the receivers to track, say, okay, well, we sent in this request, and they're still getting mail 2 weeks later or however long. They're not processing these unsubscribes. And because it's so quick to unsubscribe, they really are changing their desire for how we process unsubscribes. Pilar, can you talk a little bit more about some of the requirements or needs around the list unsubscribe and what they're looking for?
Definitely. So CAN-SPAM has, historically said that there's a 10-day turnaround in unsubscribing recipients, but it should be way quicker than that and more immediate. And now the new requirements are actually stating they need to be honored in 2 days. So this shouldn't be an issue, hopefully, with how things are already set up, but definitely honor those opt-outs as soon as possible. And then going back to one of the other conversations on authentication, the unsubscribe must be signed in the DKIM signature. And another question that is coming up very frequently is about transactional messages. So true transactional messages still do not require an unsubscribe link in general, or this list unsubscribe. But Gmail and Yahoo has also been very clear that if your transactional streams or certain types of mail are getting high spam complaint rates, they will still follow under this enforcement and filtering. So if you do have some transactional streams that are kind of in the gray area of being promotional or transactional, because I think sometimes that happens as well, I would highly recommend including the list unsubscribe. Or if it is true transactional, I mean, we see high complaint rates on password reset emails, which are true transactional. I would still highly recommend implementing the list unsubscribe still.
Yeah, and they mentioned that if you are getting unsubscribes, besides putting in list unsubscribe or an unsubscribe link yourself, if these are transactional, really think about, do I need to rework how I send these? What kind of expectations am I setting so that people understand they're going to receive them? I know there are a number of questions on here that there are some like mandatory mailings that need to go out. There's best practices at MOG. If you go to MOG, you can look at the mandated emails, I believe, large mandated mailings. I don't remember it exactly, but those have great guidelines on what do you do if you have a big mailing that has to go out, it's annual or quarterly or something, and you're required to send it. There are guidelines around that. Will that 100% get you away from some of these requirements? No, but you should still be authenticated regardless of the type of mail. You try to temper their complaints as best as possible, but if you have to send it, you have to send it. And then list unsubscribe, like Pilar said, if you need to put it in there, put it in there. You don't necessarily have to, the best you can do is just understand what's happening with that unsubscribe. It might inform you of how you better tailor your messaging, how you set expectations when you get an email address, and so on. Are there other communication streams that maybe you should use instead of email for some of these communications? So it's going to provide a lot of other information as well, for getting the feedback on what you should do. Like Pilar said, they don't look at your message and say, I know this is transactional. That's not how they're making their decisions. They're making it based on customer reaction, and what customers are telling them about the mail. In general, one would think transactional messages are wanted. So the behavior there is a little different. Because, you know, you do have your regulations of what you have to put in email, but still, from a mailbox provider perspective, they're not going to know necessarily what's transactional or not. What they do know is that this mail is highly unwanted if you're generating complaints. And so they're going to react according to that. Okay. We're still doing good on time, I think. Yes. Okay. I just want to make sure so I'm going to go through some of these next ones a little quick, because I want to leave a few minutes for Q&A. We will talk about doing a header audit if anyone's interested in, like, how do I know what I need? But first, so what you need to know. It technically starts February 1st, although some of what Gmail's been doing, it has already been rolling out. Pilar, I'm sorry, you're talking about this one.
Oh, no worries.
It rolled right in.
No worries. So the list unsubscribe, that is an example of how they're listening to feedback as well, because this is up to the ESPs and providers to enable being able to use this particular list unsubscribe. So that requirement is postponed until June, but I do know that some ESPs that hadn't had it in place have been being quick to implement it. I mean, everybody knows these are very important. And then the other requirements starting in February, but it's going to be a slow rollout, like Jen mentioned. And then what's the next little pop-up here? Okay. So sticking on the timeline for a minute though, Gmail has said too that they are going to start with some kind of like soft bounce messages. They are going to be clear in bounce codes on, you know, which requirement you may not be compliant with. So really trying to help you. And then there's like an April timeline where they will start actually blocking a % of non-compliant mail. So again, they are, you know, updating these FAQs very frequently. And of course, we're all trying to keep up with that and having these webinars, but really, if you have any questions, that should be your first stop, is to look at the Gmail and Yahoo FAQs. So first steps, audit your headers, which Jen, I think, is going to go a little more in depth with. And yes, her note, you may need your ESP's help or a deliverability consultant. And then easiest thing to do is set up Google Postmaster tools to check on your reputation, and Yahoo Sender Hub, which is coming as well. And again, even though Microsoft is not, you know, contributing to like the verbal requirements, while you're at it, set up Microsoft SNDS, similar data that you will get straight from Microsoft. And then yes, talk to your ESP, get some how-to documents, which there also is plenty of resources out there. And I know Kickbox will be sending out a good solid list of resources out with the webinar recording as well. And then just really start paying attention to deliverability if you're not already, which I think everybody is right now, even if they haven't prior. And timeline for new product features. So yes, just get your ESP involved. Everybody is paying attention to this. So there are plenty of resources out there and support that can help you implement this if you haven't already.
And there was a question from the previous slide about the 10-day turnaround for unsubscribes. It's not a legal requirement. This is what Gmail and Yahoo are doing for their policies, because they're not changing the laws. What they can do is they can control what comes into their system and what doesn't come into their system. So really quick for the audits, make sure we're good on time. Yes. I'm going to go through this quickly. So you'll see this recording later. We can always send the deck if needed. But there's a lot of questions. Do you have a DKIM signature? No. Talk to your provider. See what kind of DKIM support options they have. So a lot of these are going to have talk to your provider. This is where that collaboration with your provider is really important, and making sure that you're working together on not just these compliance, but like what you need as well. If you do have a DKIM signature, does it use your domain? No. Work with your provider. See what needs to happen. It may require that you have to buy a domain. So if you're not using a domain today that's yours, you might have to buy one. And so you need to work with your provider to say, what do we do in the interim? Because if you buy a domain, you need to let it rest for 30 to 60 days before you start using it. Otherwise, you might look like a spammer. So talk to them to say, I don't have a domain today. If I buy one, what do I need to do? How long do I need to wait? And what are we going to do in the meantime? If it does use your domain, then you ask yourself, okay, great. Did it pass? Did my DKIM signature pass? If it didn't, bring in your provider or consultant, somebody to say, what could have happened that made my DKIM fail? Was it a Microsoft issue, which can happen? Is there a DNS issue tied with it? Is there a DKIM, a key issue on the MTA? Something like that. Or is my key wrong in my DNS? There's lots of reasons why something would fail, but your provider, if they have support, is the best person to go to. Otherwise, there's lots of resources out there as well. And then if it does, party time, you're good with DKIM. The next one, you want to ask some questions for SPF. Again, does it pass? No. Check with your provider. Is this a DNS issue? Did they change the IPs they're using? Do you need to update your values? There's a whole bunch of reasons why SPF, I don't know what I just said there, wouldn't pass. If it does, again, does it use your domain? If it doesn't, and you have your DKIM using your domain, you're good to go. You could benefit from branded SPF for those rare cases where maybe DKIM gets broken. So then you can fall back on SPF. But, you know, that's something that if you had to prioritize, you could say, my first priority is getting a branded DKIM. I'll come back to SPF later. And then the other question is, it doesn't use your domain and you don't have DKIM. So that's when you need to say, I need to get DKIM. Or see if they allow you to do an SPF domain. Either way, you probably need to purchase a domain. Again, same rules. You got to let it rest and figure out what do you do in the interim. And if everything passes and it uses your domain, again, party time. For list unsubscribed, some questions you could ask yourself. Do you have list unsubscribed in your header? And I'll give you resources on how you can check all these things. No? Talk to your provider. They're going to be the ones that enable it. Unless you're running your own mail server, they're going to be the ones that enable it. So really your responsibility here is to start the conversation. Is there a checkbox I need to do in the application? Or is there a feature that you need to roll out? If they do have it, then you say, do you have the second step? The 8058, the list unsubscribe, post, unsubscribe, one click. If you don't, talk to your provider. When are they going to roll it out? And again, there's been movement on that end date, but it's still really important to know, to keep in the loop of what's going on and when, so you can test, you can make sure everything's working as well. And if you do, awesome, you're all set there. For TLS, this is another requirement we haven't quite touched on yet. In December, Google updated their docs for this. Ask if it's not in your, you'll see those in your headers too, but if your mail is not encrypted, you got to talk to your provider about enabling TLS. There are some discussions on the side of what level is required. I would like to think it's 1.2, but it might not be. That's an assumption I'm making. So again, we'll wait to see if we actually have clear guidance on what their level of encryption that they want. And if you have it, awesome. Okay, so how do I check this? If you know nothing about headers, you could pull them. We do have a guide on our Kickbox blog. We'll send you a link to that. Or you can go to kickbox.com/email spam tester. We can do a checker there for at least SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, and you can see what domains are being used. Or the folks over at Word to the Wise created this a fantastic tool called About My Email. Link is there. This will also take you through the requirements for Google and Yahoo. It's really great. So you can run your emails through there. The instructions on how to do it when you go to the site are there. Super easy to use, fantastic tool. Okay, I'm talking really fast because I want to make sure we have a few minutes for questions. And then for some ESP questions, we talked about a lot of this already, but we just want to repeat it and have it here so you can look at it later if you need a little checklist. But, you know, what do I need to do as a user of your service to get branded DKIM? Because you could understand the DNS just fine, but how do I go in your tool and physically generate a DKIM key? What do I need to do? What buttons do I need to click to make sure I have SPF? Do I need to change any DNS records? Those are questions to bring to your ESP. Get those specifics and how-tos, the step-by-step guides for that. You can ask them, hey, if I have a new domain that I'm creating for these features, do you have any features in your tool that helps me warm up? For example, Beehive has something, and as soon as you add your domain, you immediately go into a warm-up. And they'll slowly bring your domain into to warm it so that it doesn't go from no activity to a ton, because that's what spammers can do. But it allows you to slowly introduce yourself and take you through that. So ask your ESP, what do I do? Is there a way to warm up without harming my deliverability? Ask them when their unsubscribed post is rolling out. And then what do I do if there are deliverability issues or delivery issues? How do I know if it's because of change I made or a change I'm not making? So those are questions you can ask as well. I'd love to be able to answer them right now. I'm sure Pilar as well, but we won't know that until you start mailing and rolling out these changes and seeing how they manifest. But there's consultants out there. We have teams. Inbox Monster has teams. So there's so many resources out there and intelligent deliverability geeks that I don't think you'll have any problem at least asking the question. And if they can't answer it, they'll point you in the right direction. And then one thing that's come up, if you are a user that sends enough volume where you are seen as a bulk mail sender, if you send with @gmail.com, and Yahoo's done this a long time ago, or @yahoo.com, for example, you will not be able to anymore if you're not sending directly from Gmail or Yahoo. And if you're sending directly from Gmail or Yahoo now, they probably are going to tell you to stop because they're not meant for bulk sending from their gmail.com addresses. So if maybe you collected a really nice base of customers and you have a small business, but you've only been like, let's say it's jenpaints@gmail.com. I'm making that up. Let's say I'm an artist or something. At some point if you were using that in your ESP today, that's going to be gone. They're probably already working on a way for you to use the shared domain for now. And then you have to go through the process of, I actually had an example on there. A process of warming up a domain and acquiring one and what service do you use and all that kind of stuff. So again, these are the questions is say, okay, I'm using a free domain. What are you doing? What do I need to do? What are some limitations? What do I need to know about a service I should go to if they have any recommendations on that? How long should I wait? Are there certain DNS records I need on that domain that I don't have today because I've never owned one before? And so these are all questions that you can bring to them to say, what would make me, when I buy this domain, that it doesn't just look like I'm buying it as a spammer, but what are all the features about it that I need to make sure are in place? Working email addresses, a ton of stuff around that I need to do to make sure that not only that I can authenticate, but that I look reputable and that I can be reached through this domain, and that it looks legitimate and it points to all the right places, to a website or whatever the case may be. Okay, take a deep breath. We have time for questions. Pilar, do you want to add anything? Because I was going on there for a little bit.
Nothing to add. Yeah, I think we should just get right in on Q&A.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing that knowledge. That's been very, very insightful. It's a lot of information, but yeah, I especially like the list of questions for your ESP because yeah, a lot of people, right, we assume that we're all on our own. But yeah, there's a lot of resources.
Peter, I have a question came up, I think would be good for you because I know you touched on this a couple times. Do you anticipate additional guidelines for super bulk senders? In other words, people who send millions regularly?
I'm sure that they're gonna, as this has started rolling, I think it's just gonna keep evolving. But if you're already, at that level, you should already be following all of these anyway. And I think to that question, I mean, I think your DeMark policy should be escalated if it's still at none. I think like we talked about BIMI being that next authentication step after DeMark policies. So I think those are the kind of things that they will start like enforcing, especially with really high volume senders going forward.
There's a question that asked to clarify about neither valid SPF nor DKIM records are required for DeMark. You have to, for DeMark to work, you have to have, and I'm not talking Google and Yahoo, but for DeMark to work, you have to have SPF that passes and aligns with the from address, or DKIM that passes and aligns with the from address, or a combination. And the reason why they do that is you could have SPF that passes. Let's say you only have SPF. It passes and aligns, but then it gets forwarded. Now SPF is broken. And we can save the technical details about that later, but just know that it breaks through forwarding and stuff like that. So in that case, if you have DKIM then, SPF is broken, but now you have DKIM and that passes. If you added that in, now it's still DeMark compliant. So it's always best to have both, but you have to have at least one. And there's many reasons why SPF could break. There's reasons why DKIM can break. Again, why you want both. What Google and Yahoo want is they want you to have SPF and DKIM, but only one has to, it would be great if both of them aligned with the from, but they're requiring at least one to align. And that helps. There's been a lot of abuse where there's no DKIM records and just SPF. And that's for people who are abusing maybe overly SPFs that have large permissions, like thousands and thousands of IPs being abused and domains being abused that way. So by adding a DKIM and requiring that, now you're adding another signature base to it, another signal for them to figure out who this mail is coming from, if it's legitimate and all that good stuff. Okay, sorry, more questions. Is there a way to suppress complainers from Gmail? Pilar, do you want to take that one?
Gmail does not have a feedback loop that is like feedback loops for other providers. So Gmail is not sending you like individual subscribers' email addresses that are complaining so that you can opt them out. So the easy answer is no. They do have a feedback loop label in their Google Postmaster tools, but you can apply an identifier to your emails. So you could tell what campaigns people are complaining on most if you implement that feature. But short answer is no.
What if you're using a shared IP? How will these changes impact senders?
You still have to implement everything that we've been talking about. Most of the requirements are domain level. But if your IP has a bad sending reputation, that's just kind of one of the downfalls of not being able to have complete control over your reputation on shared IPs.
What happens if you are a bulk sender of transactional emails and do not add a one-click unsubscribe? And there was another question in there about one-click unsubscribe that I just remembered. Again, it's the header. When we say one-click unsubscribe, that's the header. It's not the body of the email. So for this question, if you don't have one-click unsubscribe in the header, what happens in your transactional? Nothing if you're not getting complaints, unless you think otherwise, Pilar, but if you're doing really well, nothing's going to happen. Plus, they don't require it for transactional. They want it for subscription-based streams.
But it has to be truly transactional, and it's not up to Gmail or Yahoo to determine if emails are transactional either. You, as a sender, you know, there definitely are legal requirements or not allowed in transactional email, but you know, they have been emphasizing if you're getting high spam complaint rates on this mail, that's what it is. They're going to start penalizing you for that.
What if your SPF passes and DKIM signature is valid, but DeMark fails? What could be wrong? There's probably alignment. The domains aren't the same. What happens after it passes, whether it's non-quarantine or reject, is in your DNS record and what you declare. But if both of them pass and DeMark still fails, there's an alignment issue there. If you ever have an example, feel free to share. But off the top of my head, that would be the main reason, is that there's no alignment. Another question. I think we may have answered this one already, but if someone marks stuff as spam, so Gmail's recently made a change, I think, in regard to this. The question is, if somebody marks you as spam, do I get a list unsubscribe or list unsubscribe post? So I know not to send. Like Peter said, they don't send complaints back. Before, they would, in their pop-up blocks, it would say report spam and unsubscribe. So in those cases, you would get a spam complaint and you would get something through list unsubscribe. But you would never really know if it was a complaint or if that was somebody just using the regular list unsubscribe. Moving forward, they have in the UI for some, and they're probably rolling this out slowly, they have separated it, where if you click a button, it says unsubscribe or report spam. So it's very clear. So that way, now you're either getting the unsubscribe or you're not seeing anything, but Gmail is going to see just the complaint. I haven't tested it in Yahoo to see if they've updated anything recently, but I need to do that.
I see that we are at time, and I know that Kickbox will be sending out follow-ups and resources, but hopefully we answered most questions.
I think you answered most of the main ones. Do we have contact info in case folks have questions? There we go.
Thank you all. I know there's probably still a ton of questions. Feel free to reach out. There's also going to be a lot more webinars on this. The conversation's not over after today. So as we learn more, as more rolls out, we can have additional webinars and conversations about it. And we'll go from there. And Pilar, thank you so much to you and Inbox Monster for joining us today and providing your input. Couldn't do it without you. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome info. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Be on the lookout for the recording of the webinar and this nice, healthy list of resources that we'll send you that should answer a lot of questions still. If not, take note of the contact info here, and we will be in touch soon.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.
You get the Zoom.